Well, I come from 4 generations of Mormonism. On my mother's side, they were immigrants from Denmark, and they came over here on one of the wagon trains, and they settled in Spring City, Utah, where they were converts to the church, and they were run out by the Indians, and they moved back to Manti inside the safety of the fort that used to go around Manti, and then from there they ended up in Sevier County, which is Salina, Utah. And my mother was born and raised up at Gooseberry on a ranch up Salina Canyon, and she met my father, who his father had come over from Liverpool, and he was in the CC camp, and they got married, and then they moved to Salt Lake, and we lived up in Salt Lake. And so I was LDS Mormon for 54 years, and I was raised up in Mormonism, and therefore I really didn't know much about any other faiths. You know, I knew a little bit about the Catholic Church, but not very much. I was taught, you know, growing up as a Mormon, that the Catholic Church was the mother whore of the earth, is what I was taught. And so I really didn't know much about any other faith. And of course I was told if I read the Book of Mormon and prayed about it to see if it was true or not, that I'd get this warm bosom feeling. And so I read it, and I really didn't get this warm bosom feeling, but I liked going to the programs that the church provided for the kids, and you know, I wanted to have, all of my friends were Mormon, and so I really wanted to be a part of that because they have a lot of good programs for kids. And so I got baptized and went through the different progressions of deacon and teacher and priest and elder, and eventually I got married, and ended up going to the Salt Lake Temple and getting married into the temple and sealed to my wife for time and eternity, and started getting different positions in the church, elders quorum president and MIA director and different things like that, and became a real devout Mormon. And I would go to the temple 2-3 times a week and do sealings and baptism for the dead, and just that was my life. I believed in it. Got involved in scouting, and I actually, at the time when I was involved in scouting, I thought it was the LDS Church that was the origination of the Boy Scouts, which I found out later was not the case. But I really didn't even know what a Christian was. I had no idea because I was pretty much sheltered because I lived in Utah. And being a Mormon, you know, I believed in it 100%. I mean, I was a devout Mormon, and but as being a Mormon, I never felt like that I could do enough or I was good enough, because I didn't realize that I was a sinner. I felt like, you know, that I had been taught that, you know, if I followed all the commandments and did what I was supposed to do in the Mormon doctrine, that I could one day become a god and be a god over my own world and have numerous wives and procreate these spirit babies to come and be on this earth, and that I was going to be ahead of, but there was a lot of questions in my mind, and I started to look out and started to find out some information. And every time I would ask questions about things, I was told, well, don't worry about it, just put it on a shelf, and you know, you'll know those answers to your questions when you get to the celestial kingdom.
Did you find any satisfaction in those answers?
No, I really didn't find any satisfaction, because they just said, you know, shelf it and don't worry about it and pray about it and keep reading the Book of Mormon, and so I did, and I was faithful. I was a Mormon for 54 years, but I was a real active, devout Mormon for 11 years of my life. And then I ended up getting a divorce, and it was a pretty bad divorce. I had two daughters, and so I pretty much became inactive. And I was a railroad engineer for 20 years, and I started drinking quite a bit and just not doing the things that I was supposed to be doing. I would go to church every once in a while, but there was always this void in my life that I just felt like that I was, of course now that I'd gotten a divorce, I felt like, well, I've really messed up my life now. I'm going to outer darkness.
Did you expect that your involvement in the Mormon church should have protected you from having to go down the route of getting a divorce into your thinking?
Yeah, it did. And I thought, if this was God's plan for me, why is this happening in my life? And it was, it was really confusing to me. And so, I pretty much became an atheist because some of the things that I had studied and found out that were simply not true that I'd been told, and they told me that families are forever, and if I was going to be a god of my own world, and my kids were going to be with me, but they were going to be goddesses, and my question was, well, if that's the case, then how are we all going to be together if we're going to be on separate planets? And that might sound kind of ridiculous, but it seemed ridiculous to me, and I never could get a good answer for that. And I was really confused at this point. I wasn't really quite sure where I was going. I was a railroad engineer for 20 years, but actually I'd work the night shift, and I would have to stop in Magna and get a cup of coffee and drink the coffee before I would go home. I lived out in Draper because I would fall asleep on the way home because I'd have to stay up all night, and so I drank the coffee to keep me awake so that I wouldn't crash, because I had drove out into a cornfield one time, fell asleep at the wheel. But my wife at the time smelt coffee on my breath, and she was literally going to divorce me. She put my bags out on the porch, and she was going to divorce me because I'd broke the word of wisdom and was drinking coffee. So anyway, to make a long story short, I ended up in a divorce. I ended up going back to college, and I did that for 2 years, and then I met my wife that I'm married to now, that I've been married to for 36 years. I better get that right. I'm pretty sure that's 36, 37, long time. She was also brought up in the small town of San Pete, Manti, and she really wasn't really too active in the Mormon church, but I had got to a point in my life where I was pretty much an atheist, because I realized that what I'd been taught in Mormonism was just simply not true. There was just too many contradicting things, and I could never get a right answer for any of them. And so I started studying on my own and found out that, hey, I really wasn't told the truth. So I thought, well, if that's not true, nothing's true, because when you've lived that life for 54 years and find out, it was pretty traumatic for me. And so then I went back to college, and then I wanted to move down to southern Utah, where my wife was from, and my ancestors all from Salina area. But my wife lived in Salt Lake, and I was trying to get custody of my two daughters, and they told me that there was no way that was going to happen as long as I was not married. And so we decided we would get married. We went back to court and tried to get custody of my two daughters, and that didn't happen. But anyway, eventually we moved back to San Pete, and my two daughters, as they got older, they moved back down here with us. And my wife started going to a Bible study, and the reason I moved down here is because I went back and got involved in law enforcement. I became a prison guard at the Gunnison prison, and I did that for 20 years. So we lived down here, and the prison was in Gunnison, and that's where I worked. But my wife, she started going to these Bible studies, and she started telling me about Jesus in a way that I'd never heard before. And of course, being a Mormon, you're not encouraged to read the Bible because you were taught that it's tainted and precious things have been taken out of it. And I tried a few times to read the Bible, but the King James Version, and I couldn't understand it. The thee, thou made it hard for me to read, and so I didn't read it. And so my wife started going to these Bible studies and studying the Bible, and she was sharing different things with me, and she got me a New American Standard Bible that took out all the thee, thou, plus it had explanations of what the scriptures meant. And it just came alive to me. And these women that were coming down from Provo to have a Bible study with her, they would just give me information to read and study and encourage me to read the Bible. And they told me they were going to pray for me, and I basically told them that, it was baloney. I didn't believe in it. I didn't say it in those quite that nice words, but I said, go ahead and pray all you want, but I'm not going to change, because I was pretty well disgruntled, because I felt like if I'd been lied to about that, then there wasn't a God. Somebody's going to have to prove it to me. He's going to have to come and show me himself. But as I started to read the information they were giving me, and I started looking at different movies, the DNA versus the Book of Mormon, because Mormonism still had its hooks in me, because I just kept thinking, well, what if it is true? What if it is true? And I'm wrong. And so I started watching the DNA movie, and then the Bible versus the Book of Mormon, and the Lost Book of Abraham, and realizing that there is no such thing as Reformed Egyptian, and the papyrus scrolls and what was all behind that. Then I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had been lied to and not told the truth about Mormonism. And so I started reading the Bible, which I never did before, and it just came alive to me, and I just couldn't put it down, and I just kept reading and watching these movies, and started sharing this information with other people, other Mormons, and my whole life changed. Just things started happening in my life that I just couldn't deny that there was a God. I mean, it was just unbelievable, because that weight was just finally lifted off of me. Because being a Mormon, I never felt right. I always felt like I wasn't doing enough. I couldn't pay enough tithing. I couldn't do enough good works. And being a Mormon, you're taught that you do all the works you can do, and then leave the rest up to Jesus. But I realized that wasn't true, because Jesus died on the cross, and he paid the sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice, and shed his blood for each and every one of us, for every sin that we had committed and for every one that we're going to commit. And to me, that was just a big, big relief. It was like a big weight lifted off my shoulders. And so my wife, she asked me, she says, well, would you like to come to a baptism? And I thought, well, yeah, okay. And so on the way out to the lake to be baptized, I said, well, who's getting baptized? And she says, well, I am. And I said, well, haven't you already been baptized into the Mormon church? And she says, no, but this is the real baptism. And so, being a Mormon, when you get baptized, you get a certificate at 8 years old saying you're a member of the church, and you belong to this organization. But the misconception of what baptism is all about is when you're standing in that water, you're representing Jesus on the cross. And when you go down underneath that water, you represent when he died for you and went into the tomb. when you come out of that water, you come out a new creature in life, and it's amazing what it does to you. I mean, you see things, you just have a changed heart, and you have this will that you want to go out and share this experience with other people and let them know what Jesus really is all about and what he did for you. And so she got baptized, and a year later I got baptized. And so you have a good thing and you want to share it with your family. And so my daughter, my oldest daughter, she was a mail carrier here in Manti, and I wanted to share it with her, and she actually would run and hide from me because she thought, oh, here comes Dad, he's going to preach to me again. But, you know, she loved to fish, and she'd fish all night long if you let her, and she just loved to fish. And so when I would call her, she would make up excuses, and she would actually shut the door and pretend like she wasn't home because she didn't want me to preach to her about Jesus. And, you know, I've always said there's two main ways that you can clear a building faster than anything, and one of them's to holler fire, and the other one's to start talking about Jesus. And they're like rats jumping a ship, you know, they don't want to hear that. So she really avoided me, and I was really concerned for her well-being. She was going through a divorce, and so I just told her, I said, you know, I bought her a New American Standard Bible and asked her to start reading it, you know, and she did, but she wasn't really, you know, getting it. And I just felt this inherent need to share this gospel with her about Jesus and who he was and what he did for her and everyone else on this planet. And we were fasting for her and had been for almost a month. And so I called her on the phone, and I told her, I said, can I come over? And she really couldn't get out of it. So I came over and I said, Marnie, you know, what I'm trying to tell you about Jesus is kind of like this. If I had this special fishing pond up the canyon, and I went up there every day, and I came home with this 5-pound trout and hung it in front of your face and said, hey, this is what I catch every day, what do you think about that? And you asked me if you could go, and I said, no, you can't go with me because that's my own special place. You're not allowed to go. What would you think? She said, well, I'd think you didn't love me, Dad. And I said, well, that's what I'm trying to tell you about Jesus. That's all I'm asking you, is to just look and see for yourself. Don't take my word for it, but just at least look. And so she said she would. And it was probably about a week after that, I went up to her house, and she'd really had a hard time, and I was afraid what I was going to find when I got there because of the state of mind that she was in. But she said to me, she says, Dad, she says, you don't have to preach to me anymore. I believe and understand what you're saying. She says, I went and spent the night up in the mountains and talked to God. And I said, you talked to God like you and I are talking? And she says, no, not like that. But I know what you're saying is true. Well, it was about a week after that. I mean, her whole life changed. You could tell her demeanor had changed. She was happy, and she just had a whole different outlook on life. She called up her friends that she hadn't talked to for years and told them how much she loved them. And so anyway, about a week later, she had a friend of hers come down from Salt Lake, and she was spending the weekend with her, and I had her one son with me. He was staying out at the house, and we lived between Manti and Ephraim. And so she was in Manti with her friend, and she had ordered some Chinese food in Ephraim, and I didn't know this, and then so we needed some milk, and so her son and I left to go over to Ephraim to get some milk, and she in turn had left with her friend to go pick up the Chinese food. And so I was in front of her and she was behind me, and I went in to get the milk. She went in to get the Chinese food, and they came out. Now this had just barely turned dark, so I didn't realize that she was actually in front of us. And she had hit several deer in a little Bronco that she had, so I purchased a Blazer with a lift kit on it. So I figured, well, if she hit a deer, you know, she'd be safe. because she delivered the mail in Manti and also in Mount Pleasant, so she had to travel quite a bit sometimes. And so anyway, she was ahead of me, and I turned down the airport road, and I had this just terrible feeling that something was going to happen to her, and I didn't want to even think about it. I didn't want to even entertain that thought, but I just felt this inherent need that she needed to know who Jesus was. And so I turned down the road, and we got almost to the end of the road, and I seen all these taillights backing up on the highway, and then I knew just something horrible had happened, and I was just hoping that it wasn't her. And so I had her son with me, and I turned around and went back up to the stop sign, and by this time there was cars backed up almost all the way to Ephraim, and I could see there'd been an accident down the road, and her son got out with me and started to go down there with me, and I said, no, you stay right here, I don't want you to go with me. And the closer I got, I could see her blazer upside down with the tires turning, because I recognized the tires because I had just bought them for her. And I went up there, and they were putting her friend in the ambulance, and I recognized it was her blazer, and I couldn't find her, and she had been ejected, and the paramedics pulled the back windshield off of her, and I said, that's my daughter. And just at that point, there was a voice, whether I imagined it or it was really there, I'm not sure at this time what it was, but it was an audible voice that said, where's your God now? And I turned around because I thought it was a paramedic, and there was nobody there. And I seen my grandson start running down the road towards us, and I didn't want him to see what had taken place, so I ran back to him, and he asked me who it was, and I told him it was his mom, and yeah, it was pretty horrific. So we ended up going back and picking up my wife, went to the hospital, and they came out and told us that she had passed away. And so the only thing that really got me through that was the fact that I had Jesus in my life, and I knew that she had too. And so it was pretty traumatic. And then a lot of things after that, I'm a grandparent now, and my daughter was going through a divorce, and I went to court to just get visitation rights to see my grandkids. And I didn't understand it at the time, but the judge, let me back up. They gave me a deposition, and they kept asking me why I left the Mormon church. And if anybody knows what a deposition is, it's something that the attorneys and you get together, and they can ask you questions that they really can't ask you in the courtroom. But it's also documentation, and they can present that to the judge, and he can look at your deposition. And they kept asking me why did I leave the Mormon church? And I couldn't understand what that had to do with anything of me being a grandparent and wanting to just have visitation to see my grandkids. It just didn't make any sense to me. Well, I found out in a hurry. I went before the judge in Manti, and he pretty much told me that being a grandparent, I didn't have any rights to see my grandkids unless the parents wanted me to. And then he pointed his finger at me, and he'd obviously read the deposition, and because it didn't make any sense to me why they were asking me these questions, and he pointed his finger at me and said, frankly, Mr. Gilbert, I'm concerned about your religious convictions. And I thought, I couldn't believe that actually came out of his mouth. So the reality of that is that it's been 10 years ago this September when my daughter died, and I haven't even seen or talked or heard from my grandson. I don't even know what he looks like. But I thought, how horrible is that just because of your belief that you're not going to be allowed to see your grandchild. I mean, that's horrible. But once you You can be a Jack Mormon, what they call a Jack Mormon, and not be active in the community. They'll accept you. But once you step out and actually have your name removed from the church records, life changes as you've ever seen it before, as being accepted and not being accepted. People, they look at you differently, they treat you differently, and it's unfortunate.
Why do you think that is?
They're taught that you have apostated from the Mormon belief and that you're going to outer darkness and that you're basically following Satan. And so they're taught to just not have any affiliation to do with you. I've seen people actually be put out of business because the people stop doing business with you because you're not a Mormon anymore. And it's really unfortunate that that's how they treat you. Polygamy is a big one for me. That was one of the things that I was really concerned about, because I thought, if that, thus saith the Lord, what Brigham Young would teach, that this was for time and eternity and it would never end, and it did end with the manifesto from Woodrow Woodruff. When there's documentation that John Taylor had a revelation saying that it would never end. And I think this is where the polygamists have gone off where they're at, because they still believe in Joseph Smith and his teachings. And for the LDS Church to say that they've distanced themselves from that, it's really a hard one for me to get through, when they were the ones that created it. But yet they won't, financially one of the wealthiest institutions in the world, when they have all the resources to be able to help these people get back into society, and they will not lift one finger or spend one penny to try to help these poor lost boys that are being just turned loose and end up in prison, because I've seen it firsthand, because they have no job skills other than working construction for their father and what have you. It's just, it's heartbreaking to me when they have all the resources and all the money, why they won't spend one penny to try to rehabilitate these poor people that are trying to get out of slavery, bondage, and the polygamy. And that's the fruits of Mormonism. Joseph Smith started it, and now they distance themselves from it and act like that they don't practice it anymore, so they don't want anything to do with it. But that's just simply, it's not right. It really bothered me a lot that they would spend the $2 billion or whatever that was on that mall that they were involved in up there in Salt Lake, and then cut the ribbon and have the prophet cut the ribbon and say, let's go shopping. When you go down to Colorado City and you see these poor women that have been trying to get out of polygamy, eating out of dumpsters and trying to figure out a way to support their children, and it's just not right, and so that really bothered me. That was one of the main reasons why I couldn't, and they tell you, well, we believe that we're going to practice polygamy in the celestial kingdom, but yet they don't want anything to do with what they created. I mean, there's their fruits right there. And this state will do absolutely nothing to correct the problem. They actually condone it. They turn their heads the other way. And I've seen it firsthand, and it's pathetic. And luckily, thank God for the Attorney General in Texas, because he stepped up to the plate and did what he was supposed to do with Warren Jeffs. But they seem to turn the other cheek here in Utah. When I was going through this transition, when I didn't believe in anything and I was pretty much an atheist, I worked in the prison system for 20 years, and that takes a toll on you. I worked with some of the hardcore prisoners for a long time, and I got to where I was actually a dead man walking. And the reason that I say that is because I had, one inmate that had just got out of school, because he was going to school there at the prison, and he was telling me how he was going to take some college classes, and he was really happy. And And the next thing I know, I got a call for backup to the unit, in his housing unit where he was housed. And I went back there, and he had hung himself. And they cut him down, and he was laying there on the floor, and I could see that he was deceased. And I remember looking at him thinking, well, that's one less dirt bag that the taxpayers have to pay for. And I thought, that just shows you how hard I was and where my head was at, because it's kind of like gaining weight. You get on the scales and you're 30 pounds overweight, and you go, how did that happen? But that's how hard I was. I didn't believe in anything. And to realize that I had no feelings for God's creation, and looking at this individual like somehow I was superior to him was just totally not right, because I'm a sinner just like he was. And the only difference between him and I is that I got to go home at night. I didn't probably do the crimes that he did, but as far as being a sinner, I was a sinner. And that's a hard thing to grasp, that you are a sinner, and you're going to be a sinner until he comes for you. But he's given it all on the cross for you so that you could be with him, and you're forgiven for your sins. And so, when you become a Christian, a born-again Christian, the Mormon people will say, oh yeah, all you have to do is say the sinner's prayer and then go out and live like hell, basically. But that's simply not true, because once you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior and understand what he really did do for you, you no longer want to do those things that were appealing to you. You're still going to be tempted. Satan is a master of deception. He likes to steal your joy, and he knows you better than you know yourself. And so he's going to continually try to tempt you with things. But the difference is now you understand where those temptations come from now, and that you don't expound on them. But being a Mormon, you have those temptations, but you hide them from your family and from society, and you have to pretend to be something that you're really not. And so that's what was really hard for me, being a Mormon, is that I knew I was having these thoughts, and I knew that I was a sinner, but I was trying to convince myself that I wasn't, and I was. And so once you have the freedom in Christ, it truly sets you free, because the truth needs no defense, and the truth will set you free.
What would you most want to communicate to any Mormon contemplating leaving the LDS Church? Talk a little bit about that.
There is life after Mormonism, and when I went to the temple, one of the questions they asked me, I can't, because what I've found out is there's different bishops and different stake presidents, and they're supposed to follow protocol, but it looks to me like there's not a lot of consistency there. But they would ask me, one of the questions they would ask me to get my temple recommend was if I was looking at any material that wasn't authorized by the church. And if I truthfully answered yes to that, then they'd want to know what it was, and there's a very good chance that I wouldn't get a temple recommend. So I think, speaking for myself, I know I was not truthful when they would ask me some of these questions. They'd ask me if I was associating with any apostates of the church, and which I was. And so I would lie, and that was another thing. And I thought, well, if these people are supposed to be inspired by God, they would know that I wasn't telling the truth, and they'd know that I was drinking coffee, but I'd still get a temple recommend. And what I would tell people is, don't take my word for it, but there is life after Mormonism, and there's a reason why your own prophet said it in conference. If you look at material that's not authorized by the church, you'll study yourself out of Mormonism, and that's true, because you will, because the facts don't lie. And if you will just trust in the Lord and study the Bible, because they encourage you not to look at the Bible, because they make you believe that it's tainted and precious things have been taken out of it. But I would encourage you to get a hold of these movies that I'm talking about, the DNA, the Bible versus the Book of Mormon, Jesus versus Joseph. The Lost Book of Abraham is the one that really, really will show you the truth. And just look for yourself, and don't take my word for it. And just ask God to reveal himself to you in such a way that you'll know the truth, because the truth will set you free. And you'll have a completely different outlook on life. And it's a wonderful life. And, you know, being a Mormon, the only heaven you're ever going to know is what's here on this earth. And being a Christian, a born-again Christian, the only hell that you're going to experience is what you're experiencing right now, because it's only going to get better. So that's would be what I would suggest for people to do. Don't take anybody's word. The Bible says to search out and study, and the only way you're going to do that is to get a hold of a Bible and start reading it from cover to cover. Start in the New Testament and read through the New Testament, and you will be set free. I promise you that.